Thank you. And welcome back to something I have always wanted to do, which is a continuing group of programs with Dr. Jonathan Miller, who's been my guest before, but never enough. And it's hard to know whether he's the most artistic person in science today or the most scientific person in the arts. His interests in professions, medicine, directing in theater, performing, and so on are too numerous, and in some cases too humorous to mention. So we'll just let that pass and assume that by now they know who one or the other of us is. Jonathan, something you said earlier show reminded me of, you were talking about this strange case which I had never heard of people who had been victims of the sleeping sickness epidemic,
yes, right, yeah.
and actually came back, as in Woody Allen's Sleeper, I guess, years later, and spoke the language of that time, the jargon. This is something we don't hear much about anymore, but I've always wanted to ask someone acquainted with medicine about is cryogenics, this strange thing that came along some years back of people being frozen and returning decades later, if not centuries.
Well,
is there anything to that?
I think it's very doubtful. I mean, I happen to know a little bit about it because for about 6 months, while I was doing Beyond the Fringe in London and needed a medical job which wasn't too taxing and demanding and where human lives didn't depend on my skill, I took up a job researching into the preservation of cancer cells so that one could build up a library of different types of living cancer cells by deep freezing them. And all I can say is that the enormous difficulty of preserving a few single cells in a form which made them biochemically reliable so that you could tell, say, 30 years later, what the biochemical characteristics of that cell would have been actually when they were in life, was so great that I would have thought that it was almost impossible when it came to preserving a whole body. The complications of being able to freeze a body down and then restore it are so enormous. And in any case, I think that even if, in fact, one could, with fantastic skill, overcome these difficulties, I don't think that it would be worth it. And also, I think that it would be really finally a blasphemous attempt to get over the fact that it's written into the script, or it's written into the charter of the human constitution that we die. And I think that the attempt to overcome it by leaping over intervening periods of time in order to arrive at some unforeseen posterity, I think is, I think it's bloody rude.
Not to mention cheeky.
It's very cheeky indeed, and I think that it would actually forestall and preempt all the things that we think of as being most human about ourselves, which is in fact due to our knowledge that we have a fixed span. And the idea that there was an unlimited, open-ended future would totally redefine our existence as human beings, and it's not one which I would care to be involved with. And certainly, the idea of being restored and reinstated after some prolonged period when I wasn't around, if I was taken out of commission for 300 years and then brought back into commission into a society which had been developing in the meanwhile, I cannot conceive of the sort of existence that I would enjoy. It would, in fact, be very much like Woody Allen's Sleeper, and a great deal more tragic and impossible to bear or endure. And there's, of course, there's that wonderful opera of Janacek's called The Macropolis Affair, in which, in fact, someone is given immortality and is dying for death, because the boredom, the immobility, the sense of eternity being inflicted upon you is something which no human being ought to have to suffer at all. None of us want to die, but I think that if we were really given the opportunity of immortality, I think we'd be begging for death.
But would you accept the deal with slightly Faustian bargain that would give you, say, 700 years?
No, I think that would be quite intolerable. I mean, I don't like the idea of leaving before I'm about 80 or so, as long as I reach 80 fairly intact and able to put words together and retain my water and so forth. As long as I'm allowed to do that, I'm quite happy to go to 80. I would really feel very anxious about living on much longer than that. I think that it's very hard to think how one would redefine oneself as a person if there were suddenly enormous extensions given at the other end.
You said last time, as long as I have my faculties. How many of those faculties do you mean you need to have?
Well, I thought you were going to say how many have I still got.
Well, no, they're evident.
I don't know. I just like to keep most of the ones that I think I've still got at the moment. And I wouldn't want to be too stiff or to be paralyzed or to be forgetful or not to be able to put words to things and not to be able to recognize my friends and do the things which in fact I regard as part of being human. And the idea of being robbed of those successively simply to extend life, of course, is awful. But I certainly don't like the idea of living on forever. And the idea of being put in the icebox for 300 years in the chance of reliving it again 300 years later seems to me to be nonsensical and, as I say, very cheeky as well, and greedy.
Yeah. So my fear would be that I would be somebody's TV dinner or something years later.
Well, I think you might get taken out of the wrong box at the wrong time.
Well, yeah, or you awaken and find that some dreadful group of cannibal-like future creatures. I can see somebody who's so interested in the future in the sense of, I guess in the Star Wars sense, I guess justifying it perhaps on that grounds, that it's just not fair that we're not going to know what the world is going to look like thousands of years from now.
Well, it's no unfairer that you shouldn't know about the future than that you don't know about the past. One knows a little bit more about the past than one is going to know about the future, but it's equally unfair that one is not allowed actually to be, say, at the Globe Theatre at the first performance of one of Shakespeare's plays. I feel that is very unfair. It would certainly help me to produce plays, but I'm not going to ask to be frozen backwards in time either. I think that it's very, very much part of our lives that we are at the point in time that we are, and no further back and no further forward. It's got all sorts of tragedies associated with it, and also we lose people that we love. It's rather awkward that we can't synchronize our departures. But I think anything which goes for immortality is vulgar. It's parvenu.
Except other kinds of immortality, I suppose, like artistic contribution.
Well, those are very dubious anyway, you see. I mean, people slip in and out of immortality, even great artists. I have a friend who's an art historian who wrote about rediscoveries in art, and he used a very interesting device in order to show the way in which people slip in and out of posterity. He looked at those friezes of artists that you find around the tops of museums and galleries, particularly those 19th century galleries, where you see the artists who they thought were the greats, the immortals. And if you, in fact, look at successive friezes in various parts of the world, of galleries that were built at different times, you'll find that certain people have dropped in and out of this celestial Sardis. Some of them are there in 1860, and some of them are not there in 1900, so that you never know whether, in fact, you're even going to have artistic immortality.
And if you could name 6 of them, in some cases you'd probably be doing quite well.
Yes, and it's very surprising who suddenly pops into posterity again.
There is something that I know you're interested in from something I read, and that's the idea of whether the artist or the scientist contributes more. Is there any meaningful way in which you can say Van Gogh is worth 5 Jonas Salks, or vice versa? Or pick a painter that you prefer, if you don't care for...
No, I don't think that you can set up competitions like that. It would be very hard to imagine, the life that we have now without any of these things. I think that scientists are obviously very important, and so are artists. I think that setting up some sort of competition, I think, really is fruitless. I mean, the quality of life is defined by all the contributions which can be made by all sorts of different people, and not just simply scientists. There are people who simply invent social ideas and notions which redefine our existence in some way. And I think that to rate people's importance in that way, in terms of a competition between art and science, I think is really the result of the divisions of faculties and universities. I think that no one ever thought that way before faculties got built up in the competitive fashion in modern universities.
Have you ever had to think this way in your own life, in the sense that you're gifted in various areas? What is worthwhile doing?
Well, that's different.
Shouldn't I be spending my time and my intellect on perhaps finding a scientific discovery?
Yes, I do sometimes think that that the only work which matters is science. But that's not because I really seriously, rationally think that science is more important than the theatre, say. It's just that I was brought up and brainwashed into thinking that science was the type of achievement which counted, because I grew up in a family which set great store by that, and which looked to various goals, and the goals being, you know, fellowship of various learned societies, prizes of a certain sort, publications which appeared on the shelves of certain libraries. Those were the standards by which one judged achievement. Now, if you live in an environment from the age of about, say, 9 until you're 20, where those are the prevailing values, it's very hard to rid yourself of them when you actually become a renegade and leave that particular establishment. And having left medicine, I'm always left with the remorseful sense that what I'm doing in the theatre is, in fact, transient and worthless, and that I've got to do about, say, 40 plays to make up for one scientific paper which I've not published, which is perhaps why I do produce more plays and operas than I actually ought to or would like to, in order to, as it were, make weight for not having done the scientific work, which I think is interesting or valuable.
Opera, to me, is something that would be fun to direct because of the size. I'm not sure what else would be about it, but it's an amazing thing. And you've talked about not being musical. So it's remarkable to me that you are interested in opera.
Well, let's say that I should define what I mean by not being musical. I can't read music, and I can't play a musical instrument, so that, as it were, I'm musically illiterate, in the sense that I cannot see what is written on the page and translate it into a sound. I think that I'm musical in the sense that I listen a great deal to music and understand what it means. I have a sense of its tone and what it actually is trying to express, or what it does express, and certainly can convey what it's trying to express dramatically in terms of stage movement, and that, of course, is all that's expected of an opera producer. All I know is that when you produce an opera properly, or when you see an opera which is produced properly, where the dramatic work on the stage coincides with and furthers the musical expression, the experience is even more overwhelming than a great play. I detected in what you said a certain feeling that opera is not worth doing.
No, I don't mean that. I just was surprised that someone I had read was non-musical, and now I see what you mean by non-musical, would be attracted to it, because it's
well, I mean, I do
musical.
find, I mean, it was a complete accident that I went into opera. I was asked to do it at a party once by someone who was looking around for a producer for an opera that they couldn't find a producer for, and they said, "Oh, let's get this chap here. Do you want to do an opera?" Yeah, I don't mind if I do. Yeah, I'll do an opera. And I did the opera and enjoyed doing it.
Is it easier in some countries than others to do an opera? I would think.
Well, it's very easy to do it in your own country.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do in England because they speak the same language, and also I tend to work with small opera companies. Yeah. The nicest of all, I think, is to work at somewhere like Glyndebourne, which is really rather like being in a princely estate in Germany in the 18th century. You have this tiny little Weimar in which you have a small group of singers, you have an unlimited resources of repetitors who come and play the piano, sort of shorthand pianists who come up and, you know, take an opera, please, and you can produce these things very comfortably, and you live in the country, and you have the best singers in the world to come and perform there, and it's on holiday, and it's very nice, and there are companies of comparable size in England, which is nice to work with, but when you suddenly go to the big international houses, the thing suddenly becomes nasty. Or difficult. First of all, the prestige of the place puts a burden upon your own work as a producer and director. You're expected to produce an extremely glamorous, successful event, something which strikes some sort of posture, something which makes some sort of impact. And also, you're working in Germany with large, difficult, disobedient choruses. And they're really very hard to handle. I mean, it's rather like the rabble coming back from the siege of Stalingrad. You know, they're there. They want to be shouted at. They want to be brutalized. And if, in fact, you come along in a rather kind way and say, "Look, I wonder if you could possibly cheat left, darling hearts," they'll say, "They look at you with a very resentful look and don't do anything at all, you see." Whereas what I can't do is to improvise a tantrum, you see. And I used to go away into my dressing room and rehearse rows, and then come out and say, I wonder if you would mind just cheating a bit stage left, please. No, we won't. No.
Have you tried wearing a uniform?
Well, I wanted to get into jack boots and do everything, but you see, with the way in which the German opera producers work is that they do it not so much by a military technique as a gymnasium technique. What they have is they group behind a table. With 4 or 5 of the assistants, you see, who are there with the model book, who are all looking through the thing, and they go up on stage and tell the people where to move and place them there, and they are rigidly placed in position, and then go back, and the director just looked at them and just said, would you move number 8 and 5 round to the left there? And this guy goes around and moves him, you see. Well, I simply can't work that way at all.
Is that a little too military for your taste?
Yes, it's much too detached. And I always work as a director by, I direct through the medium of the joke, and also through the medium of the coffee break, and gossip and chat, and gradually it gets into position. But the Germans don't like that, and they take advantage of you if you are, in fact, kind to them and nice to them. But as I say, I can't improvise, and also I couldn't get the goose step working. That was the thing.
You surely didn't have.
And if you do behave in a very dictatorial fashion, they will do exactly what you want them to do. But if you actually use reason and persuasion, and you're rather gentle with them and jocular, they instantly take advantage of it. Or the choruses do, anyway.
But you've mastered that now, apparently.
Well, no, not in Germany. I don't think I would ever work on the continent again. I really can't. I can't be doing with that at all. Also, I do find very big opera houses really not nice places to work. The sort of spectacle which the audience expects and wants and thinks they're paying for, I don't think is the sort of work in the opera which I think is worth doing at all. It produces rather vulgar spectacle, I think.
Did you ever have the old favorite experience of having a flat fall in performance? I saw, I feel like I saw it, a friend of mine did. It's so vivid in my mind. One of our more humorless great opera stars was in the most serious, worst possible moment when a wall came crashing to within inches of the performer, who kept going. I'm sure Beverly Sills would have acknowledged it, or something.
I've never had
referred
any,
to termites or something.
I've had no ghastly technical accidents when doing operas. I mean, the ghastly technical accidents on the whole are simply choruses refusing to do what you told them to do all along, or where they've actually cheated you and done what you've told them to do up to the dress rehearsal, and then they're reverting on the first performance to doing what they were going to do at the very start anyway. And you work very carefully with them to try and not sing out front in a regimental fashion, and they do all the business you've worked out until the first night, and they suddenly all turn out front and sing out there. And you go around and say, what were you doing? That's the way we've always done it. I mean, I had the most terrible trouble. I was doing the Dutchman, the Flying Dutchman in Frankfurt about a year ago. And I had terrible trouble because, you know, that there's a great chorus at the beginning when when the boat comes in, and when Darlan's boat comes in with the sailors singing. And I had got the designer to build a boat which was very accurate in the sense that it was rather like the boat that Wagner himself had been on when he was blown ashore in Norway, which was the thing he based the opera on. And it was very accurately based on this little coastal drifter, you see. And so we arrived on the first day of rehearsal, and here was this very beautiful, accurately reproduced boat, and then this enormous chorus. And I said, right, everyone on the boat. And it instantly looked, in fact, like one of those refugee vessels heaving off Hong Kong. There were about 80 of these people hanging on every spar of the thing, obviously not looking like crew at all. And I had far too many people for the boat, you see, and I didn't know what to do. And I said to the conductor, can I please have fewer people on the boat to sing this chorus? No question. Wagner has written for 70 people to sing this chorus. And I said, well, can I have them under the stage then? And then you just have this general sort of acoustic central heating system of sound which will come out. No, it is written for them to be on the boat. And I said, well, but you see, it looks like it looks like some refugee vessel. I don't care. It's the sound I'm interested in. And I said, well, look, it'll look absurd. Everyone will say, look, these are the boat people who are coming in. And I said, well, I know what we'll do. And then couldn't we have some of them on the stage? You can't have them on the stage. They're meant to be on the boats. They're Darlan's men. So then one of the people in the chorus said, I have a solution here. He said, some of the people could be fisher folk who have come down onto the strand to watch the wreck. And I said, but Wagner has written in the instructions that this is an empty seashore. He said, I know, but you're in great trouble here. That's all you can do. You have a few people on the boat, and then most of the people on the strand. And I said, then I had an idea. I said, all right, well, I'll tell you what I will do. It's meant to be an empty shore. And then I said, look here, can everyone, please, those of you who are on the shore, you have to talk to them. Those of you who are on the shore, please make it look as if this shore was very deserted just before you came onto it. And they said, how can we do that? And I said, well, come on, saying, my God, this must have been an empty place before we were here. And so we had this very bewildering scene of an enormous number of people coming on and looking around and saying, this is a very empty place before we were here.
Actually saying
it to one another, in German, you see. Yeah. And then that got in the way of their singing, the 80-part chorus, which Wagner demanded. So it was horrible, you see. And,
I would think that keeping your British Airways ticket right in your pocket.
I had it there. I was all ready to go, you see. And so on the whole, I don't think I'll ever work on the continent again. Or indeed in very big opera houses. I don't really like it very much. I much prefer working with very small groups of good singers rather than with enormous and prestigious casts. I mean, what I can't bear are these huge international stars who are sort of flown around like extremely expensive pieces of high-fidelity equipment and who are sort of wheeled on casters onto the stage to sing and then packed in ice and taken back to Salzburg. And I just... I like people who actually want to rehearse for 5 weeks through the performance and are interested in acting as well as singing.
What led you to believe that that experience was going to be fun before you...
The money, I think. I mean, when some extraordinary intendant arrives and says, we have been very interested in your work you're doing in London, we would like you to come to Frankfurt and do this for a very large amount of Deutschmark. Were you interested at all? And I said, yes, certainly. The Deutschmark is very, very interesting. And they didn't tell you about the German chorus, you see. No. But I like working in small groups. It's much nicer.
Yes, I think going back to directing a small cabaret act, you must have had to do as an antidote to that.
The thing I like best of all is a small company that I work with in England, with whom I do all the big grand operas, but I do them on a small scale, with a full-size orchestra and a chorus which is just large enough to actually make the sound which is demanded. Gala occasions, and I don't really like the audience that go to the big gala operas. I mean, that's what puts off an awful lot of people from going to opera, is the feeling that somehow it's a very special, exalted, patrician art form, which you have to be specially qualified for. Whereas if you actually do work with small opera companies, you actually can concentrate on the fact that it is a very available, ordinary, impressive form of drama which anyone can appreciate.
Jonathan, in the time we have left, this is an abrupt leap of subject, but the Blunt, is it pronounced Blunt case?
Oh, the
spy case?
Yes, the Blunt case. Yes.
Interests me, and I'd love to hear you just simply talk about that. There's a way in which spying, of course, is always as intriguing, but is there something particularly British about certain kinds of spy cases, and is there something particularly British about its being almost the ultimate in game playing in some way?
Well, there is.
The British are supposed to like to one-up others, and certainly spying is one way of...
Well, there are a lot of things, I think, which are very interesting, which I don't think were ever brought out, really, by the Boyle book on the Blunt case. The expose, hard-headed journalism really doesn't get what is very interesting about the Blunt issue, and about the philosophical and social attitudes that lie behind spying and the British. I think there's always been a tremendously English public school obsession with espionage, with the great game that Kipling talks about in Kim, the whole idea of anonymity, of disguise, of being a master of dissimulation, of being able to be a clubman at one moment, sitting languidly in one's leather armchair, at White's Club at one moment, and the next moment, a master of disguise passing for an Afghan tribesman. Sandy Arbuthnot was a skilled man. And also the wonderful thing is, you know, a large man, but he moved like a cat.
Yes.
Well, that's all part of the English ethos of the empire-building marksman who goes out there, and again, tremendous emphasis upon the dissimulation and disguise. That ties up with another very important English thing, the relationship between homosexuality and
I
espionage.
was going to ask you about that because there have been so many cases of that.
Well, I think that
going back to Burgess and McLean.
Well,
and
I think the reason for it is really perfectly simple. I think that the metaphor of espionage is a perfect expression of the state of homosexuality in England before it became legal. In England, before homosexuality was legalized, you lived in the world of espionage. You lived in the world of dissimulation, trying to pass for normal, trying to identify and recognize by secret signals those who were of the same persuasion, being able to pass the signals without allowing the other community to know that you were passing signals. The insane excitement of the possibility of having your cover blown, the excitement for the clandestine homosexual of the possibility of arrest.
Yes.
And in the situation of spying, you are reproducing all the moral tones and spiritual tones of the homosexual life, in fact. There again, concealment, anonymity, separation from the ordinary ties and obligations of routine life, particularly of family life, and of course Arab boys.
Oh, yes. But there have been well-known spies who were neither of those things. I mean, who were not,
Yes, indeed.
homosexual or British. But,
I don't think you have to take exams in gaiety in order to get into the Secret Service, but I think that there's a self-selection.
Curious parallel.
That there has been, and perhaps always will be, some sort of relationship between homosexuality and espionage, precisely because espionage does involve this business of dissimulation, and also it expresses separation from the ordinary ties and obligations of routine bourgeois family life.
And being the outsider.
And being an
in some
outsider
ways,
as well, I hear that epileptic fit music again.
I hear it again myself. Perhaps it's telling us to go away. Well, let's obey it in this case, and unlike a German chorus, and we will see. We'll be back with Jonathan Miller, and so join us next time. Good night.